everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Christina Eckhardt. I'm the chair of the Early Career Professionals Working Group within EOPH at ATS. The topic of today's talk is the ATS Grants Process. And we are joined by Dr. Kamran Atabai, who's a physician scientist and professor of medicine at UCSF. His laboratory focused on understanding how cell-mediated collagen degradation impacts the severity of fibrosis and how enterocyte absorption and storage of dietary fats regulates whole body metabolism. He is the chair of the ATS Grant Review Committee and a strong advocate for support and development of junior scientific investigators. Thank you again for joining us. And then we also have Leslie Engel, who is a grants and administrative professional with expertise in public health and communications. She joined ATS in 2023. And as Associate Director of Grants and Awards, she manages operations of the ATS Research Program, including the peer review process, grant lifecycle, financials, and communications. And she's committed to advancing impactful initiatives in biomedical research and in public health. So thank you so much, both of you, for joining us, and I'll let you take it away.
Great. Thank you, Christina, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I am just going to dive right in. Again, I'm Leslie Engel. I'm the Associate Director for Grants and Awards at ATS, and I'm going to tell you about our funding opportunities. So ATS currently offers two different types of funding opportunities, our unrestricted grants and our partner grants. Our unrestricted grants are $40,000 for 1 year, and we currently offer 6 grants per cycle. Our partner grants are usually between $40,000 and $100,000 per year, 1 to 2 year grants, and these grants vary by cycle. This is just an example of some of the organizations and industry partners that we've worked with over the last few years. So let's talk about the grant cycle timeline. Something to note is that the research program grant cycle has moved onto a calendar year schedule. And so at the moment, we have open applications, or I should say open grant opportunities available for our partner grants. The letter of intent deadline in this current cycle for our unrestricted grants passed earlier this month. But please take a look on our website for our partner grant opportunities because we have a number that are available and we encourage you to apply for. This is the current partner grant opportunities that we have available. All of these grants have, or I should say, all of these opportunities have 1 grant available, with the exception of our Early Career Investigator Award in Pulmonary Vascular Disease, which has 4 grants available, and all of these opportunities are for 1 year grants. So I encourage you to visit our website to look more into the details of these grants and the eligibility requirements. And again, you can apply for these grants by July 1. And just looking ahead to our next open grant cycle, again, since we've moved to a calendar year, the next full grant portfolio and inclusive of our unrestricted grants will be opening in January 2026 with a start date of January 2027. So that technically would be for our 2027 grants, which seems like very far into the future, but we'll be here very soon. Moving into our grant eligibility. So ATS recently adopted an organization-wide definition of early career investigator. And we now consider individuals who are within 0 to 10 years of their terminal degree or completing postdoctoral training as early career investigators. In addition, we would consider someone who has not received significant prior funding, like an R01, to still be an early career investigator. In addition to ECI status, we do require that all grantees are a member at the time of their award. I assume that everyone here is an ATS member, but if you happen to not be a member, you can still apply for one of our grants, as long as a member of your key personnel who's mentioned in your application or LOI is an ATS member. And we also require a commitment from your home institution for a faculty position by the time the award is made. And we recently instituted an eligibility quiz that kind of goes through all of the eligibility points that I just mentioned before you are able to enter the LOI or application. Our partner grants also use similar eligibility requirements, including the early career investigator status. There is some variability, however, in the partner grant opportunities. So I encourage you to, closely review what we have on our website with regard to the partner grants. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us early. We're a small staff and we want to answer your questions in a timely manner. We tend to get a flurry of questions right around our deadlines. So please take a look at what our grant offerings are as soon as they are announced and email us with your question. We do consider exceptions to our early career investigator status if you've had like a non-traditional career path, military or parental leave. Any questions around that, please send us an email and we'll be happy to answer your question. Moving along into the application process. So once you have gone through the eligibility quiz, if you are submitting a proposal for an unrestricted grant, that requires a letter of intent first, because that is a two-stage application process. Our partner grants, no letter of intent required. You can just submit a full application. For the letter of intent, which is required for our unrestricted grants, it's a fairly short application form consisting of a bio sketch, your other sources of grant funding, information on your key personnel, including their bio sketches, certification of your faculty commitment. A tip here is to please use the templates provided. This makes it much easier for us doing our administrative review of the applications once they come in, and for our scientific grant review committee. If everything looks uniform, it makes it much easier for everyone to review. And then for the LOI, the information on your proposal itself is a brief hypothesis, your specific aims, experimental approach, and for those of us who are not in the lab, a lay summary. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kamran to tell you all about the grant review process.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Christina. So basically, the grant review process aims to mimic the NIH process as much as possible, with a caveat that we have a letter of intent step, which the NIH does not for most of its grants anyway. So basically, we have the LOI phase. This is a very shortened version of the application that will be reviewed by 2 reviewers who will provide an overall score but no written comments. And then we will take the top scoring LOIs and invite them to submit a full proposal. And that number of how many LOIs go to full proposal will be somewhere between 30 and 50%, depending on how many applications we get and what the numbers look like. So the full application process then undergoes 3 independent reviews with reviewers who have expertise in the field. The first 2 all 3 reviewers will provide an impact score, and the first 2 will provide written comments, which will be made available to the applicants. We then rank the preliminary scores, and then we discuss in the full committee about half of those approximately applications, again, depending on the cutoff. And those applications get a full review, meaning that in addition to the 3 reviewers, the whole committee hears the presentation of the first and second and third reviewer and discusses the grant in greater detail. At the conclusion of that, the entire committee then submits final scores, which are then averaged, and that's how we get the rank of the lowest to highest score. And then we recommend, as a grant review committee, we recommend that the top applicants be selected for funding. And then that goes to the actual partners, if it's a partner grant, and to the ATS if it's the regular grant, and those get funded. So tips for success, I think these are just kind of general tips for any kind of grant. One is to try to remember that this is a fellowship training junior faculty grant, so it's a bit of a different target than say if you're writing a 5-year R01 grant, and it's important to make sure that you actually are writing a grant that's appropriate for the mechanism itself. By that I mean occasionally we'll get very, very beautifully written grants, but that are clearly beyond the scope of anything that this mechanism can provide, which would be better suited for an R01. And while the grant may read really well and sound very exciting, those grants don't do well because they're not appropriate for this particular grant mechanism. It's important to target your proposal in the sense that we have a large number of unrestricted grants, but then we also have partner grants. And if your science matches the partner grants, it makes sense to go and submit it to the partner grant. A, because there's often less applicants, so overall funding success is higher. And B, because some of those grants are also for more money. So I would always make sure that if you have a partner grant eligible grant, that you select that as your first choice. Other things to keep in mind, again, these are general grantsmanship things for all grant mechanisms. One is you have to have the right team. So the expertise is important. So if you're a molecular biologist and your grant has a section that's got perhaps some human studies that are extensive, then you want to make sure you have somebody with expertise in how to analyze that and have the right statistical sorry, not intelligence, but experience to be able to take care of that. On the other hand, if you're a clinical researcher and you're planning on having an aim that has a more basic focus, you want to make sure you have someone on your team that has the experience. So if there's something you're proposing to do and it's not obvious that you have done it before, it's important that other members of your team have done it before, so that you don't get dinged for people thinking that perhaps the grant is not feasible. It's important also to have a statistical section. This is very important now in all grant mechanisms. So you should have a rationale for your sample size. This is where a good grant can run into trouble if there's no discussion of why you pick the sample size you have. It's particularly important with clinical studies, but also with basic science studies. So you want to have a calculation of your basically power to achieve the hypothesis that you're going after. And then equally important is to have an appropriate pitfall section. You can have a beautiful grant, but if nowhere in there's a discussion about what if your hypothesis is wrong, and then how would you pivot based on the data that you get there, then that can be really problematic and a major pitfall, because reviewers will think that you're assuming that your hypothesis is right, and if it turns out it's not, you have no thought given to what you would do and how the grant would be worthwhile anyway. Because ideally, you're asking questions that whether the answer is in line with your hypothesis or proves that your hypothesis is incorrect, excuse me, it still is guiding you to the next step of your research program. So that's a really important part of the grant application process as well. So tips for success. So eligibility, that's just, are you eligible based on our criteria? Feasibility, so I want to highlight again, don't submit your R01 grant for a fellowship. It's not going to be feasible that you're going to be able to do what you propose for 5 years in 1 year. Don't propose methodology that you have no experience with and you have no one on your team that has experience with. I don't mean minor stuff like if you've, you know, done a lot of stuff with RNA and you're doing something slightly different. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if you propose single cell sequencing and you have nobody who's analyzed or successfully done single cell sequencing, then people are going to be a little bit less likely to think that your proposal is feasible. Mentorship is very important. These are mentored grants. So A, you want to make sure you have a mentor that is supportive, but B, it should be obvious in the application that the mentor is truly supportive. So some examples would be, sometimes you'll see a mentorship letter that is clearly written for another grant and it's just been sort of stuck into this application process, and that'll raise questions among the committee like, is this mentor actually involved in this process? Or there'll be something in the grant that's a major error that's a grantsmanship error that a mentor who's read through the application would have picked up on. An example of that would be if you have a 2-aim grant, and if your first aim turns out to be incorrect, it completely shoots down the second aim and makes it worthless. You may be early in your grant writing process and not appreciate that that's a death knell for a grant, but your mentor should be able to pick up on that. So it's good to have evidence that the mentor is actually involved and has the appropriate expertise. And we've talked about the grantsmanship issues. Basically, this is what I was speaking about. And the timeline Leslie has covered.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That was, certainly a helpful overview for the ATS grants, but also just a helpful overview in terms of tips for successful grant writing in general. So thank you for that. I applied last year for one of the partner grants for the ATS grant in interstitial lung disease, and I was lucky enough to receive that funding, and I can sort of attest to everything that Leslie and Kamran have mentioned. In terms of the application process, it was extremely streamlined. It was very straightforward. And sort of if you've applied for grants before, it'll feel very familiar and kind of a well-trodden path. And then the experience itself has been extremely straightforward. Leslie, I've enjoyed communicating with you. You've always been incredibly responsive and helpful when it comes to sort of executing the aims that were laid out in this grant. And so I can attest that it's been a very worthwhile experience. The funding has been really instrumental in terms of generating pilot data, which I intend to use to build the foundation for larger proposals in the future. And I would definitely encourage others on the call to apply. I personally sort of made the decision to apply last minute at the encouragement of my mentor, and I assumed and was aware that the ATS grants can be very competitive. But I certainly sort of like you'll miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So I would definitely encourage people to apply. And it's definitely been an extremely worthwhile experience for me. I think with that, we can take any questions from the audience. I know I personally have a few, but I want to open it up to our other members to see if anyone has any questions. Feel free to either unmute and speak up, or you can put things in the chat. Luz?
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. It's super helpful. I'm just looking for, sources for funding. And my question is there from ATS, because I haven't seen it, is there like a group, that serve as mentoring for these type of grants, where we can either at least look at our letter of intent or give on comments if it's responsive, to one of the calls that we want to apply, or someone that we can talk to, about our idea and suggest us which one to apply to, or that's more with my own mentoring team.
So I know I'm not sure that if ATS has a specific mechanism in place for essentially what sounds like a grant writing workshop. I would imagine that does happen at the ATS meeting in some format or not, but off the cuff, I don't know. There's nothing formally through the ATF grant review committee that serves like that. I will say that we are going to be having examples of successful letters of intent and full applications that are going to go online. We've been working on that in the past year, so that would certainly that will certainly be happening moving forward. But as far as like a workshop where you might have actually like 1-on-5 or 1-on-10 interactions, we certainly don't do it through the grant review committee. But the ATS does have those workshops every year, and I would be shocked if there's nothing to do with grant writing. Maybe not this year, but in the past. I don't know, Leslie, if you're more familiar with that. You probably not, because I've been here longer, but.
Right. Yeah. I am, I do know that we have this ongoing series around around grants generally for the membership. But as far as like grant writing workshops, I don't think so, but we could certainly do a little more sleuthing on that and find out what's out there. And then, we encourage applicants to, talk to their peers at their institution and their mentors for things like that as well.
Perfect. Oh, and last question, just following up on the examples. Do you have any idea when those examples are going to be available or not yet? You're just going to announce it later.
It's imminent. We are very close.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So imminent, to me, I'm guessing imminent means like 3 to 6 months, but I don't know. No, I'm just to put a number on it because things move at. Leslie's fantastic, but imminent still takes time.
It does.
But I don't know, Luz, if you're planning on applying for this cycle, well, the LOIs are already in, so I guess it would be the next cycle.
Unless you're applying for a partner grant.
Yeah, for partner grants. So certainly it may happen for this cycle for the partner grants, exactly.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think it's essentially the advice for grant writing. I think one should really think of it as is the mechanism of the grant. So is this a mentored fellowship, early faculty grant? Those tend to have the same categories. You're always going to have to talk about your significance. You're always going to have your aims. You're always going to talk about your pitfalls. You're always going to talk about your statistics. So those are kind of hardcore grant things that should be in any grant. But the difference is if it's a training / early career development grant, then, the committee is also just looking at whether this grant is a good stepping stone for you to reach R01 level, a project that could then lead to R01 level funding. That's a little different, and there's more room and encouragement of the training component of it versus I'm now applying for an R01 grant where really the science is the main thing.
I have a question, which is with the unrestricted grants, is there an area of focus that you are interested in funding or sort of paying close attention to, or is it more just, you kind of weigh the grants themselves and just sort of select the top 5 that seem the most compelling?
Yeah, so Leslie, is it okay if I take that or?
Absolutely, yes.
So the unrestricted are truly unrestricted. And in the past, we had sort of different pillars with sleep, critical care, pulmonary, and that's fallen by the wayside. So there's not a specific emphasis. I'm happy to say the last 2 years, there's been a nice distribution across both basic, clinical, and more translational. So I can certainly vouch for the last couple of years where it hasn't been that all 6 of them are very basic science focused or all 6 of them are very clinical. That's not an intentional thing, but it's certainly our hope that it wouldn't be biased in one way or the other. But that's the way it has worked out. But no, there isn't any specific thing we're looking for as far as type of research goes. It's wide open, and it's also true that also means that a molecular biology grant will basically be competing with perhaps a translational patient-focused informatics grant, and that's not optimal. And we've sort of stressed about how to make that optimal, but as it is now, that's how it is. But at least the last couple of years, it's been very nicely distributed.
Thank you.
Sure. And while we're waiting for anybody questions, the ATS grants are competitive, but they're not more competitive than NIH grants. And so I think you want a level of competitiveness that is realistic. So I wouldn't let the competitiveness be a reason not to apply. And again, I can't emphasize to you enough how the partner grants, sometimes we only get a few applications in each category. So if the category matches you, then the competitiveness drops dramatically.
I have a second question. What besides the focus of the partner grants, is that sort of like philanthropic organizations are partnering and that sort of decides the direction of those grants? Like what is
I mean, a good way to look at it is the partner grants we had this year. So there's and Leslie, you're going to have to correct me as I get some of these wrong, but there was a sarcoid grant, there's pulmonary hypertension grants, there's usually a dedicated fibrosis grant. There's one that's been around the last couple of years about nasal oxygen. It depends on who is the partner. There's typically one for alpha-1 antitrypsin. So it usually tends to be a foundation that wants to have a grant and essentially hires us as their grant review committee, not that they pay us, but farms out the grant review to us, and then we give the recommendation back to them. They're all pulmonary/critical care, and they usually hit some of the big topics. And then we have relatively newer ones that come and go. For instance, like the high flow nasal cannula grant mechanism has only been around a couple years. We had a really interesting set of applications for it this year, but it just depends on what other foundations, or even sometimes it's pharmaceutical companies, are sponsoring a grant, and do they want us to take care of the grant review process.
I see. Okay, understood. Thank you. Ranu, do you have a question?
Hi, Christina. I'm getting the roofing done, so there's a lot of noise, so I typed it in the chat box. So you talked about like some categories really get few grant applications. Is there any statistics or any information on your website about it? Like, I'm just interested to.
No, there's no statistics on it. It's a moving target, and it's different from year to year. I think and Leslie, correct me if I'm wrong about this. The unrestricted grants rate of funding, if you get past the LOI stage, tends to be around 15 or 20%. And then if you say that the LOI stage is half of them, then you're talking about a 10% funding rate. Where these other ones, we will never publish statistics on how many applications we got, but I can tell you that sometimes there's one application for the mechanism. Sometimes there's two, sometimes there's three. And usually there's one being funded. So, right away and there's no LOI stage. So right away your funding rate's gone up dramatically. And they also, I'm going to pull them up right now while we're chatting. They also often are for more money. Nobody wait for me, but I'm just.
Yeah, for example, that ATS, the Early Career Investigator Award in Pulmonary Vascular Disease, that's $100,000 for 1 year, in comparison to the unrestricted, which is 40,000. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess what I would say is that you're when I would be looking through the portfolio of available grant mechanisms, if your grant fits into any of the other categories, then it makes sense to apply to those categories. If it doesn't, obviously, then there's no point in changing your signs to apply for a fellowship grant. That's a 1-year thing.
Is there any category for environmental exposure related grants or projects, or it's just disease-wise? There are grants for ILD, there are grants for pulmonary vasculature or pulmonary hypertension. So are there grants only for environmental exposure? It is a EOPH assembly, so I asked this little bit biased question.
Well, you could certainly apply under the unrestricted grants for that. As far as the partner grants go, I don't think so, but I'm looking. Leslie, do you have it here? Is there a way to put up? Oh, actually, I have it right here. Oh, yeah. So let's just, if we have the time, so let's just go through the partner grants that are on the website for this year. So there's an ATS alveolar capillary dysplasia research grant, so that's very specific, and it's $100,000 for 1 year. There's an Alpha-1 Foundation grant, also very specific, $50,000 for 1 year. There's the ATS Research Grant in Obstructive Lung Diseases, $50,000 for 1 year. There's a Johnson & Johnson Early Career Investigator Award in Pulmonary Vascular Disease, that's $100,000 for 1 year. So those are the 5 that are available that are partner grants, and none of those are specifically what you had asked.
And with these partner grants, I'm looking on the website. It looks like some of them will say it can range from basic to translational to clinical, while others of them really sort of specify, like the award for pulmonary vascular disease. It looks like they really want research on related to basic mechanisms or vascular biology. Is that typically spelled out in the description of those partner grants?
If it's specific, it's spelled out. If it's
Okay.
not spelled out, then it's, you're good to go.
Great, thanks.
Great. Does anybody else have any questions? All right. Well,
So who do review these grants? Means it's a ATS call all the reviewers, or there is like 2-3 factors that decide who will get the grant sometime, because these grants are like a RFA, so they have specialized ask like what you want to see as a grant. So is it just a scientific review, or it's like 2-tiered review where you also see if it matches to mission of the ATS or this RFA?
So we do the scientific review and come up with a score. And then are you asking, is there another step before that? Yeah. So essentially, I mean, Leslie may be able to address this better than I will, but essentially we give our recommendation to whoever's sponsoring the grant. And in general, if our recommendation is that these are the grants that get funded, they get funded. It's up to them ultimately, but I don't recall ever really having a problem where they disagreed. There is the rare occasion where, the grant we review for a particular mechanism we don't think is really one that should be funded. And so our recommendation will be, we did the review and so we can recommend that there's no grant that we think should be funded. We try not to do that, but occasionally there's just not a grant that seems like even if everything's done right, you're just going to get nothing out of it, then we won't recommend that, even if it's the only grant in the category. But as far as like, is there multiple tiers after our recommendation? Not really. There is another tier. I mean, they can decide, but they generally are going to go with what our recommendation.
Yeah, I asked this question because right now getting the funds and then how the reviewers review, the grant's gonna be reviewed. That all is different in different funding agencies. So I asked this question for ATS.
No, it's no problem. That's the whole point of the information session. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add to that, in my brief experience at ATS, which is a year and a half now, the partners at the organizations, they have not, we do send the application to them after the review, and they have all been thrilled. So it's not exactly another layer of review. It's more of I would say a courtesy than anything else.
Great. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Leslie and Kamran. Thank you so much for lending your insight into this topic. I'm sure we'll have some future applicants here on this call.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Christina.
Bye-bye.